Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. And if you're looking for PTCGO codes, please do check out the Potown store. You can go ahead and use the OmniPoke discount code for an extra 5% on your orders. Let's jump into today's video, and it is going to be the top 8 of the World Championships. It's a really exciting tournament to be a part of and also see how it concluded. Of course, there was a new set being released as well as a big rotation, so it's the most we've ever had to adapt towards a new format ever. And we got some really creative lists to round out the top 8. It was Mewtwo that ended up taking down the entire event with Henry Brand from the Australia. And yeah, he was able to deny Shintaro Ito from becoming a 2-time world champion in a very thrilling finals. And today we're going to be looking through their deck lists, talk about why they were so successful, and really talk a little bit about how they might have to adapt to survive in the format now that we have sort of seen them come out onto the scene so successfully, how they might have to improve for the future. So Henry was piloting that Mew3 deck, as I've already mentioned, and this is the toolboxy style deck that has a plethora of attackers. That's why you can see so many different GXs in here, because the main intention of the list is to try and force these Pokemon into your discard pile for the most part, via things like Mysterious Treasure, Electromagnetic Radar, Giant Hearth, and Acrobike. These are your main discarding tools, as well as Viridian, to then copy with a big powered up Mewtwo and Mew tag team. The deck has plenty of forms it can go in. It can go very aggressive if it wants to, being able to use things like Double Blaze GX on turn 1 to start putting the pressure on early. It can start powering up a bunch of energies in the back with things like Solgaleo. It can spread damage with Naganadel GX and also Espeon and Deoxys being an amazing inclusion to the list. It's the first time I saw it in the build, and it made so much sense. It really was mind-boggling. I think Espeon and Deoxys really does open up the door for this archetype to beat so many otherwise fairly unfavorable matchups. I believe that your Malamar is actually very favored now with Espeon and Deoxys in the list. If you go first, and you can just like Welder attach to Mew3, and then you can Welder again on turn 2 and attach a Psych Energy, you can cross division like all of their Inkays, and they just can't do anything from then on. So Espeon Deoxys is insane for dealing with Malamar. It's insane for dealing with Pidgeotto style decks as well. Beheeyem showed up day 1. Obviously Pidgeotto Control is one of the top 8 lists that we'll talk about in a moment. So all of these decks that rely on having some sort of engine based on Pidgeotto, really going to get punished by cross division. You can take a bunch of prizes and their draw engine out all at once, which is really rough for them to deal with. And just in general, 200 counters being placed around the board is very flexible and powerful. So I really think Espeon Deoxys was an amazing include to Mew3, one that I hadn't really considered myself too much in testing, and I feel like it really opens up the door for Mewtwo to be a really good deck. Other ones that you'll notice: Solgaleo, Latios, Naganadel, Reshizard. These are all like the standard ones that you normally expect to see. The Cobalion in here, even without Rainbow Energies, really just for that Iron Rule GX attack alone. And this is giving you a chance in games where you haven't drawn perfectly, and your opponent is threatening knockouts on you. Maybe they're also a Reshizard deck, maybe they're a Mew3 deck. You can use Iron Rule GX and make it so that they can't just come in and swing against you with like a Double Blaze for 300 damage, for example. Buy yourself that extra turn, find your Welder on the following turn, and get back into good shape. So this is kind of like your get out of jail free card if you haven't had an ideal opener. So something to bear in mind. It obviously gets a lot less value when you're not playing Rainbows. You can't use Dual Saber. Not that it's a great attack, but you also can't use its ability too much. So I can see this card being potentially like a flexible card, but I know Henry was a big fan of it and said that it could win him some games. Magcargo gives you the option to have Burning Magma, which is pretty awesome, against, again, things like Pidgeotto Control decks, against Shedinja decks, which is a nice thing to just tick off your list, because it also comes with a nice Lava Flow attack, which can also be a nice one-hit KO option, which isn't using up your GX attack, which is pretty nice as well. So Lava Flow is a great way you can close out games, and we also see the other Mewtwo deck run a much more focused Magcargo engine in their build. So Magcargo being one of the probably best attackers that Mewtwo can use, actually, if you do focus your list around it, and that's what the other Mewtwo player did. They were more focused on just spamming Fire Energies as much as possible. So not too much else to discuss about the Pokemon line. Heavy Dedenne, Heavy Cherishable, and Radar gave him very good outs to draw a bunch of cards early on, as well as giving you great discard synergy as well, so definitely something to bear in mind. The only other Pokemon really is the Resetting Hole Marshadow. This is a great card to have. slap it on your bench, and then you're sort of like proofing yourself from a reset stamp plus power plant combo, which things like Charizard might try and pull off against you. Definitely greens builds. So having this as like a searchable stadium removal is really nice. Obviously they play treasures, so it just gives you good outs to remove that power plant that's really pesky. Also, Red Knuckles is a reasonable attack, obviously pretty good against Naganadel as well. Naganadel can be sometimes a scary attacker for you because they of course hit you for weakness. Yes, we have Jirachi, but that can get picked off and stuff. And if they're on that 3 prize turn, they're very scary. So taking a knockout with a non-GX into them is also something that's always very helpful. Onto the items, I've mentioned the Radar. It's an extra discard synergy type option, whilst being an extra out to Dedenne alongside your 4 Cherishables, so it just seems like a nice include there. I think he said he put it in over 4th Treasure, which makes a bunch of sense, because you don't really need to have 4 treasures, because a Mew3 sticks on the board for so long anyway. You're already playing 4 copies, you have Cherishable for them, so I can definitely see the reason Radar sneaks in as an extra consistency increaser. And that's really what his list is all about. It's just playing the 4 Bike, the 4 Gear, the 4 Cherish, the 4 Customs, the 4 ofs of all the good cards, basically. And it's really interesting to see how the format has shifted to like away from decks that play like 12, 13, 14 supporters and gone more towards like Welder is so insane, I just want to spam the Welder whenever I can. So that's why you're seeing more and more lists go towards heavy Bike, heavy Gear, or heavy Bike and Jirachi, just to say Welder is the absolute nuts in this format. Let's try and make that happen as much as possible. There's a bunch of lists in the top 8 that are Welder reliant, and they follow a similar pattern where they're trying to spam their outs to Welder as quickly as possible, because your win condition is basically all reliant on this one supporter card. That's why you see such a low supporter count, is because it's literally like Welder's just the stone cold nuts, and just try and spam him when you can. Playing 1 Crystal for some nice fire energy recovery. I think this is a really clutch card from my testing with it so far. It's one that you never really want to pitch with the Acrobike. It's not too comfortable because if one big powered up Mew3 goes down, you want to make sure you have enough to see you through into the late game with attacks like Lava Flow and stuff as well, so something to bear in mind. Couple copies of Switch, getting around status and just moving out the active whilst retaining energy cards. Giant Half really does come into its own in this deck. It's extra discard energy, which you always love seeing, and giving you access to your energies to attach and to Welder and stuff is obviously insane. We knew the stadium was nuts, and U3 is a great abuser of that stadium. 1 Viridian also just to give us extra access to the Psyche energy, just so that he can use Espeon Deoxys, Latios, Naganadel, and even Jirachi's Star Search if he really has to. And you can always use Miraculous Duo GX. It's kind of like the forgotten GX attack because you have so many cool ones in the list. But this can also be a great way to like heal your guy fully, and even if you've had stuff stuck on the bench that have got some damage on them as well, you can restore all that as well. So Psychic Energies really are like the most clutch energy that you can play. There's been plenty of like Rainbow Energy Mew3 builds, but it looks like the Psychic Energy ones were the ones that came out on top in the end. A couple builds analysis just to sort of supplement the Welder. You don't want to have too many copies of this guy, but he still can be good digging potential for, you know, late game customs as a win condition. He can get you towards a stadium out as well, which is always nice if you're going to get hit with, once again, things like Power Plant, which is naturally a bit of a headache for Mew3. So build just sort of adding towards the list in total. I think for me, the list is really, really good. Obviously well tested. They've cherry-picked the right attackers. I think the Espeon Deoxys, again, is like the one that really blew my mind. As soon as I saw it, I was like, this is completely opening the door for Mew3 to be absolutely nuts. And I think it's definitely an archetype that's powerful going forward. And because you have the flexibility of just changing attackers for whatever the meta is, it's going to remain pretty much a top-tier archetype, I would say. So really, really awesome to see. My own opinion is that Cabalion's probably like the only flexible card in the list, and you may want to play around with that if you feel like you want to add in some other tech attackers, or if you want to try some other supporters or anything else in the deck. That's kind of my first port of call. Maybe change Cabalion. That's the only real card. But once again, in one world, so I'm not going to question these too much. Shintaro coming in at number 2. This time having to settle for second place with his Cephalon deck. It's a very interesting list. It is the Dragon Naga based build, and it's fairly high on the Dragon Naga 2 count. I was testing a 4 baby 1 GX Naga line, and Shintaro's gone for the 3-2. It does make me a little worried about how reliant you are on charging up, because you only have 3 copies, and then prizing and then getting knocked out can actually be a bit of an issue, especially with him only playing 3 B-String. So he's really cut some corners here to try and... Like, it's surprising that he's still able to maximize damage output against these tag teams in format, because it feels like hitting multiple B-String is just the nuts against them. And we saw, like, in the finals, he was able to, like, triple B-String and then just get a Heatran out of nowhere. That was really awesome to see. And it feels like playing 4 B-String would probably, like, add towards that. However, the thing he's tried to do is go heavier on Welder. So he's trying to get extra attachments this way around. And let me tell you, if Reshizard and Mew3 keep succeeding, especially Ability Zard, which we'll see from Tord in a moment, they're both decks that play Giant Hearth, and they put those in play for you, and that makes Full Welder such a genius include from Ito, because you just get your Welder value like the entire time. So Welder is the big winner of Worlds, really, and if other decks are giving Giant Hearth to you for free, that's amazing. So I can see Full Welder being absolutely amazing in his list to go alongside these 3 B-Strings. He's playing 4 Cynthia, 1 Hapu, 1 Lily. I'd like to hear his thoughts on Hapu and Lily as one-ofs. It feels kind of obscure having the 1 Hapu. It does give you some minor discard synergy with Fire Energies for charging ups and stuff, but he's playing customs, he's playing one-of Stamp, he's playing B-Strings. There's a bunch of cards you actually don't want to bin with this deck. So it's a surprising card for me to see in here. I would probably just swap that for a Lily, in my own personal opinion, but once again, I don't want to question these amazing players. They are far better than me, but just from a... I'd like to see like the rationale behind this one-of card. For energies, he's playing 14-5, which is actually on the lower side, because he's squeezed in the extra Psychic to allow him to Venom Shot through things, which is pretty cool. Giving you good bench pressure is always nice. I think with Welder, again, it feels like I would just want to have the 15th Fire, though, and just rely on Beast Energy a little bit more, kind of lead into that card a little bit, but again, that's just a personal preference card. The Sniping, I'm sure, is a valuable option in the deck. From there, there's not too much else I can question. The core is very similar to all of the Blounds that I was testing the entire time. The double Heatran's a really interesting choice. Now, I think this may have just been a one-off for like a long time, but it may have been down to things like Guardy Sylveon doing well day 1, which is why we see a 2 count in his list, to give him an option to attack against Guardy Sylveon, basically. Because otherwise Blounds are just walled out by the Fairy Charms. So Shintaro may have made this adjustment just after seeing the day 1 field, so that he doesn't just get stonewalled by those Fairy Charms. So that may be why we're seeing 2 of them. However, 1 copy is still really good in the deck in general, just because Hot Burn GX is a great option for you. We saw him do like charging up to all across the board, get 1 B-String, and then you can just get him into the active, and he can steal all that energy for himself and do a big Hot Burn GX. If he's not response KO'd, you basically win the game just by retreating and using Cephalon and removing all those energies. So, yeah, I mean, this Heatran's a really nice card. I think that's why we see 2 copies, though, mainly for Guardy Sylveon, potentially for some, like, he's just expecting other Fairy Charm users and stuff like that. Maybe even things like a Sceptile or something, because we did see Alolan Eggs do well, reasonably well by the couple of people who piloted it day 1. So I think this was more a metagaming choice. I think that's why we're seeing the odd count of 3 Blound, 2 Heatran, instead of like 4 Blound, 1 Heatran, which would probably be like the more standard way to go about the deck, I guess. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. But overall, really solid list. It's a shame that we couldn't see him win twice in a row, but it was also cool to see Henry win. So he's such an insane player, Shintaro, so it's cool to see him do well again. In the top 4, we have Blaine, Hill, and Tord Reklev, both playing Charizard builds, both very different Charizard builds, however. Blaine opting for trusty Green Zard. The real spice in his list is that he plays 1 copy of Lusamine and 5 individual stadium cards. And that just means he has a little bit of control over the right matchups. Lab's obviously very good against the Malamar decks. Power Plant obviously good for things like Mew3 and Pikarom. Hearth, a great stadium in general for you. Shrine being a math fixer again for things like Pikarom and Heat Factory in general, just a great stadium for you. Lusamine has the added benefit of getting back things like extra welders and greens as well to help you set up. When I tested Lusamine myself, I thought it was too cute and I didn't get much use out of her. But I didn't play this full 5 different stadium, like plethora, I guess. So something to bear in mind. From there, the list is just very straightforward. Regular old Reshizard, I guess. It plays 1 Spinner, 1 Flint, instead of like just 2 Fiery Flint. Spin is obviously very good when you're going second. 4 Great Potion, 4 Mixed Herb, so he's maxing out on the healing options. But yeah, I think the only real spice is this Lucamine and the variety of stadiums that he has. Everything else is straightforward Reshizard, still proving to be very powerful post-rotation, and yeah, did him well for sure. We move on to Torslist, which is very, very interesting to look at. Once again, it's one of these lists that plays a very low support account. It plays 1 Pal Pad and 4 Welder. It really has made the statement that Welder is the insano card that you want to spam almost every turn, because it means you can smack, and smacking is good. The Ability Zard list really does take advantage of a lot of cool things. Obviously, you have great consistency with the 3 Dedenne, 4 Cherish Ball, as well as 3 Com. So you get yourself into the game almost all the time. You also have Stellar Wish to support that. It can get you into things like Giant Halves, Counter Stadiums, so you can get around Power Plant. It just gets you pushing towards Welders and stuff as well, which is always great. So the Jirachi Dedenne package really does help the consistency of this build a lot. You get to play a 2/2 Tails. 9 Temptations is an absolutely insane ability, so that you can have control over Gusting. And when you're playing 18 Fire Energy and 3 Giant Half, let me tell you, you can gust as and when you like with this deck. It's really, really insane. And being able to just pick off these big threats gives you an inherent advantage against pretty much everyone else who, even though they're playing custom catchers, they can only find them on a couple turns in the game, whereas Ninetales is basically threatening it whenever you want to. So the main selling point of this Zard build is that you control their board more than anyone else, which is really insane. It's not just running the double Reshizard though. It's also playing, again, Heatran, which has proven to be a really amazing card because really he's just a 1-hit KO, but he's a 2-prizer instead of a 3-prizer, so that's always great for you. Make life difficult for your opponent, make them spend custom catchers, make them do this, that, or the other, which is always great for you. We also have the Turtonator, which is a non-fire type attacker, which is actually very important because there is things like Bronzong and Araquanid. So Turtonator being a way to attack through those attackers is always great. Whilst also being an additional non-GX for you that can take 1-hit KOs. Again, skew prize trade, take 1-hit knockouts. There's nothing really wrong with this card. He's always pretty reasonable. As well as another non-GX attacker in Victini Prism Star. Doing that Infinity, it does ruin your deck quality in the late game by putting back all those fires into your build, ruining your like Stellar Wishes and whatnot, but you can at the very least like Giant Half them back out of the deck and just give yourself like final pushes with Welder and stuff. But Victini's just a late game 1-hit KO as well, so really the idea of this deck is to power up a Reshizard early, usually go for a big Double Blaze for 300 by turn 2, and then use things like 9 Temptations and whatnot to get even more fires into your discard pile, let the Reshizard fall, and then Victini for like your last 3 prizes, or if you've been using 9 Temptations elsewhere, you can use Victini for like your last 2 or whatever, and that will just close out the game. So it really is a great aggressive build of Zard. It doesn't have many defensive options in the deck, it doesn't have any stamp, any hand disruption whatsoever, but it's just looking to cycle as much as possible with the bikes, the Welders, the Dedennes that you spam early, get yourself to a low deck, and then just pretty much end up using Infinity to leave your deck with just fire energies. From my early testing with this deck, I think it's absolutely crazy. I really do think this deck is amazing. I think Super Scoop Up is the real question mark card in the list right now. People may be looking to make a few changes to Torslist, and I think Scoop Up is my first port of call. We saw him, whenever he was on stream, he was not getting use out of these Scoop Ups. Maybe that's just how the meta's developing. Maybe there is enough of a push away from Malamar because it's done so badly. To just say Scoop Up probably isn't all that worthwhile in my deck right now. Maybe it's worth adding spaces for things like Tapu Fini in the list instead. Maybe adding in like 1 Fire Crystal because it just helps you have extra outs to Welder and Ninetales and stuff. Maybe something you might consider. And just having more raw switches to Stellar Wish more often is probably the only thing I would think about with these spaces. By all means, test out the Super Scoop Ups, but from what I heard from Tord, he was using them just to try and 50-50 an extra Dedenne here and there when he was able to. And oftentimes your attackers that are damaged have too many energies on them anyway to think about scooping up because it's such a reduction in tempo. You would rather just smack with your active, let it get knocked out, and then finish off the game with an Infinity or something instead. So the scoop ups don't seem to be incredible. I'm sure they would have won him games here and there if he had faced things like Malamar or whatever throughout the games, and I'm sure if people are setting up damage, you can super scoop up at the right times, but it feels like the most flexible card in his list from then on. Everything else I think is absolutely awesome. It's just all consistency cards in his list. So yeah, 18 fire, actually doing well at Worlds was awesome to see. And it's not the only time we see that either. We see 16 energy. Actually, it's 18 total energy in Ryota's list as well. So turns out theme decks are the way to win at the moment, which is pretty awesome. We see Kaiwan once again performing with Pikarom. He top 4'd in Sydney. Was it Melbourne? I can't remember. The Internats this year with Pika, and he's back again with a fresh list. And let me tell you, this is pretty fresh. He's playing the Jirachi build of Pikarom, and that's kind of like the least, like definitely the lesser popular one going into Worlds. I think I initially wrote off, like I initially started with Jirachi build and then realized how bad my Malamar matchup was. So then added in Labs and didn't like the anti-synergy between Labs and Jirachi. Kaiwan's gone about it a different way though. He is still playing the Labs. He's only playing one board and he's playing 4 physical switches. So he's not shut off by his or opposing Labs as much as other Jirachi builds would be. And also, having Jirachi opens the door for Cyrus Prism Star to be an epic tech card to make your Malamar very strong, actually. So it's interesting how I went away from Jirachi because I didn't like how it performed against Malamar, and Kaiwan was like, I want to play Jirachi because the card's too good to not play. We'll work out Malamar somehow, and this is how he did it, using Cyrus to limit their bench. Can force some really ugly plays from the opponent. You can leave them to just 2 Malamars on board. It cuts off their own Stellar Wishes. It cuts off whatever they're powering off on the bench, which is really nice. Sometimes it cuts off Mew as well, which is amazing. Your opponent has the headache of going, okay, I've been Cyrus. Do I keep 1 Malamar, 1 Mew? Or do I keep 2 Malamars and potentially your opponent can just go, okay, tag switch, attach, tag bolt, and kill a Malamar in your active, and then you're left with literally 1 Malamar in play. So this is a very aggressive way at dealing with Malamar in particular. It's also very strong against other setup-based decks like Dark Box, for example. And it's just a really disruptive card against people in this meta, which is really awesome. So Cyrus, definitely an annoying card for specifically Malamar, but also maybe strong in other spots as well. And it lets you play Stellar Wish, which is really awesome. Outside of that, his Pokemon line is all very straightforward until you come to the Sigilyph. Obviously, he's only playing 1 Zeraora, and that's because he plays such a high switch count. But Sigilyph is a pretty cool card. This was touted to be a decent option in Malamar, and it turned out its best home was actually in Pikarom, which is crazy to think about. And his Mirror Counter ability is what we have to thank for this. If he's active and is damaged by an EX or GX, put damage counters on the attacking Pokemon equal to damage done to this one. You do have Lightning Weakness as well, which is actually a help for you in this deck, because you are oftentimes going to get value out of this in 2 different ways. The first of which is Lightning Ride GX. It's a GX attack that you will use often. You can take a big 1-hit KO, slap the Sigilyph up into the active, and now your opponent has to find custom catchers to do anything, or they're probably just going to take a whole bunch of damage, and you can either, knock out whatever's just knocked out Sigilyph, or you can put enough damage on them to knock them out with a follow-up attacker. So Sigilyph and Lightning Ride is an absolutely filthy combo. And you also have the option of simply jamming him in the active early if you're not able to get your full blitz off. For example, in like a mirror match, if you go second and can't full blitz turn 1, you could just instead commit things like your Cherish Ball or your comms towards getting a Sigilyph, attaching an energy on whatever's active, and free retreating with Zeraora or using a switch to put Sigilyph in the active. And then your opponent's not only in a spot where they need to find their own full blitz, but they also need to find custom catchers. And if Sigilyph can buy you a turn in a Pikarom mirror, it's like you've gone first, basically. And in my experience with Pikarom mirror, if you don't attack first, you rarely win. So giving yourself a tech card that can actually help you control and give yourself a favorable mirror match was something that I've been searching for a long time. Basically, the reason why I didn't play Pikarom myself at Worlds was because I thought the mirror was too 50-50 and there was no way that you can control the mirror. Turns out Sigilyph was the very odd answer to that equation, and it's pretty awesome to see it do well in Worlds. Outside of that, the item cards are not too exciting. We see the Stadium Nav, quite a low counts of energy switching options. I think that's because you've got to shoehorn such a thick Jirachi line in. I'm surprised to only see 1 tag switch and only 2 E-switch. It means you have to be very careful about all that energy placements, but he's kind of making up for that with a full physical switch. So I guess his mentality is he will never attach to the active. He'll always just bench a Pikarom and start attaching to that guy, and then you're going to find manual switches instead. I guess that's more of a mentality, that kind of thing you have to do when you're playing the deck, rather than turbo Pikaroms that we've seen play like 2 tag switch, 3 E-switch. You normally attach to the active. Attach to the active, knowing that you can find those E-switches later. So, bit of a mentality thing is the only real difference there. Playing double stamp for hand disruption is really nice. But yeah, I think this is solid. I'm excited to test out Sigilyph. I think it's pretty jokes. Very good against Mirror, and I think also pretty good just in other random spots. If your opponents run out of custom catchers, or if you're combining it with that Lightning Ride, just forcing answers from them could be really awesome. So I was definitely a big fan of seeing the Sigilyph in there for Mirror alone, basically, because there's no other way that you can really improve your Mirror. Paco was also a Reshizard player. His list is quite different from Blaine's. It's not playing the Lusamine package. It's also not playing any copies of Great Potion. It's instead adding an extra reset stamp. It's also playing 1 switch, 1 tag switch, which is a cool combo that I was testing in my own Reshizard as well. You can, weld a tag switch off of a damaged Reshizard onto a new one, and suddenly you're flare striking out of nowhere, which is pretty awesome. It's playing 2 Power Plant, 1 Shrine, 1 Factory, and just the double Flint, no Hearth. And it's also playing 1 Cheeky Choice Helmet. I think that this is solid. I like the Hooper include as well to slightly improve your Malamar, and just being a card that you can even use Mind Shock with alongside Welder, which I think we even saw him do on stream to knock out something like a Vulpix, I think. So that was a pretty cool include. I like Hooper as an extra non-GX. It means you can make your opponent go through 5 non-GXs and 1 Reshizard as well in those sorts of matchups, which is something to bear in mind. So Reshizard proving itself to still be very, very powerful. I think going forward, Power Plant gets even more powerful as well, looking towards things like Ability Zard and Mew3. I can definitely foresee there being some sort of need to have Power Plant as a mainstream deck in the format. I think Guardian was doing it, and I think also Green Zard has the chance to be that big Power Plant based deck. Ryouta was also playing a Mew3 deck, and it is vastly different to our winner Henry's list. It is way more focused on the Magcargo, as I mentioned. You'll notice it's playing double Magcargo, 1 Flareon, 1 Heatran, and 1 Solgaleo. So the combination of Flareon and Solgaleo tells me that he really wants to get a bunch of fires into play so he can start smacking with Lava Flow. That's basically like the big difference between his list and Henry's. He's gone away from things like Latios. He's gone away from a bunch of the tech cards, really. The only real tech card is Espeon and Deoxys, and man, we know how good that is. Instead, he's saying, I just want to flood the board with energy as much as possible. He's got the Heat Stage attack, he's got the Turbo Strike, he's got the 4 Welder. He's not playing Bikes or Pokegears. Instead, he's playing 4 Hapu. That means that he'll have turns off Welder, for sure. But Hapu does provide that same sort of discard synergy that we were looking for with the Acrobikes and stuff. He's actually playing a lot less Ball Search overall. He's only playing 1 Treasure for Cherish. He's still playing the double half, though, which is pretty cool. Played a Rangaroo. I don't know if this is for a specific matchup that he was worried about. I'm not certain about playing it myself. I think that's probably like the wiggle room card if you're looking for one in this list. But yeah, it's playing 16 Fire and 2 Psychic, so that tells me that he's really focused on using this Lava Flow a bunch of times, and then his GX attack, of all things, is probably Power Burner GX, looking at it from the top of my head. Similar to how Tord's mentality was to use Infinity to close out the game, Flareon does that for you, but it does it in a really neat package by having Heat Stage as your early accelerator, and then Power Burner GX as like your closing attack. It's literally the same as Infinity, but for 1 fire, so it's amazing. I think it's really cool that you go so high on these fire energies, start trying to Hapu them away, start trying to half them, Heat Factory them, get them in play, also, of course, Lava Flow them away, and then you just close the game with a Flareon GX attack for a big swing. So really awesome to see a different approach of Mewtwo being taken. Still has the same core values, though. It has Espeon Deoxys for these Malamars and for like Pidgeottos and stuff. Magcargo being a great 1-hit KO guy, Solgaleo and Flareon being your accelerators, Heatran just being a nice 2-prize attacker if you really need him to use his GX attack for a clear. The only real other changes is that instead of playing like bikes that Henry did, and more ball search, it plays double stamp and double labs, so it's trying to be even more aggressive against, well, the stamps are more defensive, of course, but labs is more aggressive against Malamar. I think your Malamar matchup is very strong if you play the combination of double labs plus Espeon Deoxys. I think it really should be solid, so yeah, I think this is a very interesting list, one I also want to try out alongside Henry's build, because it doesn't have the same options with the Cobalion and the Latios. Instead, it's just going, I'm going to absolutely blow stuff up with Lava Flow, which is really interesting. It also doesn't play a Charizard. It's literally just saying Magcargo is the better choice here, which is a very bold statement to say. But yeah, interesting for sure. Let's move on to our 8th deck, which is Isaiah Williams with that Pidgeotto Control deck. I don't really know the best name for this deck. I think I want to call it Bird Flu. But that's just me. It was a very interesting kind of secret deck that the DDG guys came up with and piloted. Also, we saw Igor Costa win one of the DC Open flights with this deck, or at least a rendition of this deck. I don't know the exact 60, but definitely a potent build for sure. The idea is that you're going to just use the combination of resource management alongside Airmail being your effective Zoroark of this format to get the cards that you want to run your opponent out of resources. How do we run our opponent out of resources? Well, of course, it's going to be via the Crushing Hammers that throughout the entire time. Run them out of energy cards, also using things like Mars to remove cards from their hand. But really, as you can see, there's nothing like Shedinja or anything else in here, so the way that we stop our opponent just attacking us to take 6 prizes is going to be the combination of Reset Stamp plus Mars plus Chip Chip Ice Axe. You're not only going to reduce their hand to basically nothing, you're also going to use Chip Chip Ice Axe to control their top decks, and then simply get yourself into this loop of resource management and Airmail so that you can continue to Chip Chip Ice Axe and Mars away their hand throughout the entire game, whilst weaving in Crushing Hammers until their board state is terrible. Once you've done this Chip Chip combo, and if you're in a place where you're happy with your opponent's 3 cards, that they're not going to do anything for a while, or at least something you can like continue to Mars away, you actually do end up attaching 3 energies onto your Oranguru, and you probably start taking prizes with Profound Knowledge. 60 and Confuse is enough pressure to win if you're continually running them out of energy cards and using that Chip Chip Mars combo. So it's a very annoying deck to play against, that's for sure. And it was definitely successful for a couple of those DDG guys. I'm sure it wasn't just him who ended up getting points with the deck. I'm pretty sure other people made top 32 with Pigeon Control as well. A couple of them didn't do so hot, but definitely some of them did make it. It's got things like Giraffe Rig to get lost against some awkward decks, maybe some heavy Fire Crystal based decks, maybe things like Mew3 which have awkward attackers that you don't want to deal with, and a few other things like Malamar as well. It can obviously be very good against. Articuno comes in for a big GX attack option to remove all the energies off of a big attacker if your Crushing Hammers aren't quite making it happen. Obviously, there are Welder builds galore out there right now, so obviously you will go for a Cold Crush at some point in the game. And yeah, that's really the idea. You fall behind, but grow a big hand, and then with that big hand, you just try and go Stamp, Surge, Mars, Mars, Chip, Chip, good luck. Like, that's pretty much what you try and do. You sacrifice prizes whilst building your board, and then you make the comeback by giving your opponent no hand to play with. You choose their top decks, and then you're just going to Crushing Hammer their board until it's nothing, and Profound Knowledge a bunch of times as well. That's pretty much the idea of the deck. Pretty annoying to play against, but it looks like it's optimized for that goal, and it seems to be a goal that works as well. So yeah, very annoying deck that did very well. Definitely one that we have to keep an eye out for and still test against as well, especially with Hidden Fates coming out soon. Jesse and James is probably a card that will definitely go into this list and make it way scarier. It means you don't have to Surge Mars and Stamp. It means you can do it way earlier in the game, so you have much more of a prize buffer against people, because you can go like Stamp even at if there are like 4 prizes, you can go like Stamp, Surge, Jesse James away, 2 Weezings, Brock back Weezings and your other Pokemon and stuff, and that sounds really ugly to deal with. So Pitching Control is definitely one I'm keeping my eye out for with Hidden Fates around the corner, because that's going to be one to bear in mind. So yeah, that is the top 8 list, guys. Hope you did enjoy. I think going forward, there's going to be a little bit more Cephalon around, so Tapu Fini might finally start creeping into the format, into some of these 3 prize decks, so you can have a chance against Cephalon. I think also Power Plant is looking very strong with the likes of Henry's build, Tord's build, and Ryota's Mewtwo list. Like, all 3 of these decks, even Pikarom as well to an extent, they all hate seeing Power Plant, and we already saw 2 Greenzards do well. I can foresee that remaining a very powerful contender, to be honest, in the format, because it's disruptive and still powerful. So let me know what you guys think down below. We're going to start jumping into these lists in more detail for my own videos over the next couple of days and weeks as well. So we're going to get some proper game time in with them, and talk about what I'd like to change now that we've seen what we have seen during the World's Weekend. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in a video next time.